I've always had a rebellious streak, not the kind that lands you in jail, just the usual teenage trouble, sneaking out, parties, drinking, smoking, that sort of thing. My parents, however, were pretty strict, and they didn't take very kindly to me breaking their rules or hanging out with the wrong crowd. I guess I got caught sneaking out one too many times. Something you should know about my parents is that despite their strictness, they like to think of themselves as modern or progressive, whatever that means. When they caught me, they didn't take my phone or ground me. Instead, they signed me up for Silent Night, a sort of special camping retreat marketed as a digital detox and discipline program for teens. The catch was, talking wasn't allowed. No noise, no phones, no distractions, just peace and nature.
It'll teach you restraint,
Mom said.
a chance to reset.
Silence can be healing.
Dad added, like not being able to talk for a month was gonna cure me of my desire to go out and do anything fun. Whatever, I thought. At least I'll be around other people my age, and I won't have to deal with their bullshit anymore. It might even be fun. I can't even begin to describe to you how wrong I was. It was a gray morning in late autumn. I boarded a bus filled with other kids and was shipped off to a campsite in the middle of the woods, miles away from any vestiges of civilization. When the bus rolled up the gravel drive, the camp looked harmless enough. A cluster of cedar cabins, a long mess hall, a small lake glinting between bare trees. Counselors in beige khakis greeted us with clipboards and smiles that looked almost unnaturally friendly. They took our phones, gave us notepads so that we could write anything we needed to communicate, along with noise monitoring bracelets, thin black plastic bands glowing with a tiny red light on the top. The rules were printed like scripture on the first page of the notepads. Rule 1, absolute silence. Rule 2, no wandering off alone. Rule 3, certain areas of camp are off limits. Don't enter any zones marked restricted. Rule 4, obedience is safety. Disobedience is discipline. On the website, they called it a way to foster mindfulness and self-regulation. They told parents we would be in small groups with therapists and trained staff. I remember thinking the silence would be temporary, an exercise, a novelty. I was 17 and still carried around that notion of naive invulnerability so many people my age seemed to have. The first day felt like a test. We ate in silence, walked quietly on nature trails, meditated until my legs went numb. The bracelet sat cold around my wrist and buzzed once when I tried to mouth a joke to my bunkmate. The small red light blinking, I snapped my mouth shut. The silence felt almost performative at first, like being in a church service where nobody wanted to be spotted praying wrong. But before long, the lack of noise became oppressive, like a pressure pushing down on you at all times from all directions. It wasn't like the quiet of a library or a chapel. It was a living, watchful hush that made even small sounds feel out of place. Chairs scraped and everyone flinched. Coughs were swallowed so hard you could see throats move. A spoon dropped in the mess hall, and 30 heads turned in milliseconds, faces blank. Some kids were already hollow. They sat like statues at mealtimes, eyes on their plates, hands moving robotically. Their skin looked washed out, like someone had turned down the saturation on them. Others were tight with fear, small, quick movements, always adjusting their posture, unable to keep still. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. On the fourth night in the mess hall, one of the boys at the far table suddenly broke. He slammed his tray down, the clatter echoing like a gunshot in the stillness, and shouted,
"This is insane. You can't make us all sit here like robots."
The sound of his voice was like a bomb going off. Heads jerked up. Some kids froze mid-bite. Others looked down instantly, as if hoping to disappear into their food. His gaze drifted down towards my table.
"You newbies don't get it, but I've already been here for almost 4 weeks. I haven't said a word in a month."
The boy's voice cracked as he went on, more desperate now.
"We're just kids. You can't keep us."
He didn't get to finish. 2 counselors were on him in seconds, moving faster than I thought possible. Their smiles were gone. One grabbed his arms, the other clamped a hand over his mouth. The entire hall sat motionless, not even daring to shift in their seats. The boys' muffled yells turned to grunts as they dragged him toward the side door. The last thing I saw before the door swung shut was his wide, terrified eyes. No one said a word after that. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, and the next morning, his bunk was empty. Did they send him home? We all wondered, but no one knew. All the counselors seemed to act like he never existed. By that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something to get away from the monotonous cycle of wordless meals, hollow-eyed campers, and falsely cheerful counselors who never even seemed to blink. That evening, I snuck out, feeling rebellious and in search of some privacy. I decided to make my way into one of the restricted areas of camp we were told not to enter. At first, it was nice, the forest to myself, no one in sight. But it wasn't long before that peace was broken by a strange noise that seemed to be coming from beneath me. It was faint at first. I wasn't sure what it was. I put my ear to the ground, trying to make it out. After a few minutes, the sound came back, more clear this time. It sounded like a stifled cry, longer than a gasp, sharper than a sob, cutting through the stillness like an arrow through air. It stopped almost immediately this time, though, as if someone had clamped a hand over their mouth. Feeling creeped out, I decided to go back to camp. I slept uneasily in my bunk that night. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard out there. What if it was the boy who shouted? I wondered. Francisco. I had learned his name was in the days since his disappearance. There's no way. I tried to rationalize with myself. I didn't even know for sure that the sound I'd heard was real, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something weird was going on. I decided to start keeping track of small things in my notebook, names, patterns, a roster of absences. There were more than I expected. A girl missing from the art tent, a boy from the fishing group, a counselor absent for a shift with an excuse about a personal matter. The more I watched, the more the silence started to feel like a smokescreen covering up something bigger. It was around this time that I met Mara, a slightly older camper who'd been there longer than most. She was pretty with light brown hair and hazel eyes. She noticed me observing the crowds and approached me. Right away, I could tell she was like me. Mara carried herself differently from the other campers, calm where they were hollow-eyed, alert where they seemed dulled. She sat beside me one afternoon, watching the same gaps in the crowd that I had been observing. She tapped me on the shoulder and gestured with her eyes toward the notebook in her hand. "You're not the only one keeping track," it read. When our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen since arriving at camp: recognition. She wasn't trying to intimidate me or push me to stop. She was trying to say, "I see it too." From then on, Mara became my anchor. We shared notes, names we remembered, empty bunks we counted. She made me feel less alone, even as the silence around us thickened like fog. Until one day, after a girl from my own group, Stephanie, disappeared too. I couldn't stop thinking about what could be happening to the disappearing campers and the noise I had heard a few nights prior. This was when Mara and I decided to further investigate my hunch about the restricted zones. I waited until the breathing coming from the bunks around me slowed. Watching the corridor lights blink out, I raised myself from my bunk with practiced cat-like stealth. Outside, the air hit my face with a cutting chill. The moon lay thin and pale. The lake was a dark chasm. I moved between cabins, like a serpent silently sneaking through the undergrowth, chasing its prey, before eventually meeting up with Mara by the north side of the lake as we had planned. We made our way back to the restricted area where I'd heard the strange noise a few nights prior. After some searching, we found a service door neither of us had ever seen, heavy and bolted, with a small window at eye level. Peeking through, we saw a room lit by a single dull bulb. The smell hit me first, metal and antiseptic, and a sense of heaviness in the air, like fear, so strong it felt tangible. Then we saw them, heads bowed, strapped to chairs. It wasn't long before I recognized them. Francisco, Stephanie, along with a few others whose names I couldn't quite remember, though I think Mara had told me. They were still alive in the way a candle is still alive, flickering, low, fleeting, like a sudden gust of wind could take them out. There was clearly a system in place. Every sound they made was met with a precise answer. An electrical current pulsed through a strap wrapped around their temples. I didn't see gore, thank God, but I saw pain executed with methodical precision. The counselors wore rubber gloves and measured the captives' responses like technicians reading a gauge. It became obvious quickly. Noise caused escalation. A whimper, the punishment grew. A scream, they would step up whatever they were doing by increments, like a dial being turned one notch higher every time. Silence brought a pause, a tiny reward of release. Over time, I started to recognize the expressions they wore. The kids I had seen back at camp, the ones who had been through it, they had the same hollow look these four were developing right here in front of my eyes. Not quiet by choice, quiet for survival. Then came the flashlights. They cut through the dark in long, blinding sweeps, too many to count, moving fast and purposeful. Mora yanked me by the sleeve and we booked it, running as fast as we could, stumbling over roots and stones, hearts pounding out of our chests. The woods seemed endless, every shadow a hand reaching out to grab us. We ducked behind a collapsed log, pressing ourselves low against the damp earth. My chest heaved. I tried to silence each breath. Mara squeezed my wrist, steadying me. For a moment, I thought maybe we had slipped away. Maybe the darkness was enough to cloak us. But the lights drew near. Voices murmured, not frantic, not confused, but calm, rehearsed. They knew. They had seen enough to know we were there. A branch cracked just beyond the log. I couldn't even bring myself to breathe.
Come, help me check over here.
One of the counselor's voices cut through the night like a blade slicing through cloth. My heart dropped. We looked at each other, desperation filling our eyes. We were done for, and we knew it. That's when Mara rested a calming hand on my shoulder. Eyes wide, she mouthed one word, "Run." Before I could respond, she shot out from behind the log, racing through the undergrowth like a deer flushed from cover, drawing the attention of the counselors hunting us as she crashed through the brush. Their flashlights swung instantly toward her, beams slicing through the dark as shouts erupted, measured, confident, not panicked. I stayed frozen, every muscle screaming to run after them, to try and save my friend. But her sacrifice had already carved my path. I wouldn't let it go in vain. While they gave chase, I slithered in the opposite direction, low to the ground, heart hammering. Each step felt like betrayal, but the only way I could help her now was to do what she demanded. Run. So that's what I did. I ran until the cold air sliced my throat and my legs shook beneath me. I didn't stop until the cabins rose into view, still and silent, like nothing had happened. That night, I laid in my bunk, terrified, pretending to sleep, wondering what happened to Mara, ears straining against the silence, listening for the sound of the counselor's footsteps. By the next week, Stephanie, Francisco, and the others we had seen that night had returned to camp, looking broken, but there was no sign of Mara, the only person who had been keeping me sane in this God-forsaken place, gone. I told myself Mara had escaped somehow, that maybe she was hiding, waiting, biding her time. But deep down, I knew the truth. I became practiced at pretending. Smiles were small, pointed, and I learned to keep my head down. My notes hidden under the floorboard beneath my bunk. It was a week later when the truth finally came out. Morning inspection had just ended. We were filing into the mess hall when one of the counselors paused by my bunk. He crouched down, smile fixed in place, and brushed a hand across the floorboard with deliberate care. His fingers curled, and when he rose, he held my notes in his hand. My stomach dropped.
Follow me, please, young lady,
He said cheerfully. I did as he asked. I didn't have a choice. I was surrounded by counselors, their uniforms spotless, smiles pasted on like masks, eyes as unblinking as glass. The others didn't even glance my way. No one ever did. We marched in silent formation. I knew exactly where I was going. The service door, the room with the dull bulb, the stench of antiseptic, the chairs, and Mara. Her head lolled weakly against the strap, her eyes half-lidded but still open. She looked nothing like the fierce, steady girl I'd clung to. Her lips moved just barely, cracked and trembling. The counselors didn't acknowledge her at first. They guided me into the empty chair beside her, buckles tightening around my wrists, the cold strap pressing against my temple. The hum of the machine stirred, alive, waiting.
Your friend here told us about the little excursion you two had,
said one of the counselors, a big burly man with dark brown hair and an oversized grin that never reached his cold, unblinking, jet black eyes.
Don't feel betrayed. It took a lot to get it out of her, as you can see,
he said, gesturing towards Mara, still looking broken and shattered, strapped down in the chair next to mine.
But once we saw the tracks you left beside hers, we knew we couldn't stop until we found you. We can't have you running around telling anyone what you saw that night, now can we? So let's make sure that pretty little mouth of yours stays shut. Permanently.
As the first jolt tore through my skull, I understood why everyone looked the way they did. Quiet wasn't peace. Quiet was punishment. Quiet was the only thing left when the pain stripped everything else away. The punishment was precise. It wasn't the chaos of violence, no smell of blood in the air, or thudding impact of blows landing. Instead, it was measured. They ratcheted up and watched for reaction. They read my face, looking for a change in pressure. If I cried, they intensified. If I held quiet, the pain loosened, not out of mercy, but because I had fed the desired behavior. Time was a foreign concept to me in that room. The days, hours, minutes, all blurred together, folding into one another. I felt the bones of my resolve splinter. I mouthed soundless pleas in my head, rehearsed words that would never find breath. I cried inwardly until the tears dried on the inside of my skull. And when they finally let me stagger back to my bunk one morning, I wasn't the same. I could still move, I could still think, but the part of me that knew how to scream had been caged. They even took away my notepad and pens, leaving me with no form of communication and no hope. A week later, the police came. I'm still not sure how or why. Maybe one of the parents called them? No idea. But who am I to question good things? They walked the camp in pairs, shoes whispering over gravel. They were polite men and women with clipboards. They asked questions about facilities, licensing, permits. They chatted easily with the counselors, who smiled like wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. An officer crouched in front of me at one point, helmet under his arm, face open in the way of people who are trained to look for injuries.
Are you all right?
He asked.
You look a bit off. Has someone hurt you?
My mind played a cruel trick on me then. I had paragraphs of accusation stored like grenades behind my teeth. I could name every room, Every hidden hatch, every lie. I could draw them diagrams. I could tell him about Mara, who was still missing, about the measuring devices, about the way they use pain against us like a twisted science experiment. I could map the whole place like a crime scene, but my throat closed. I wanted to speak. I flexed my jaw until the muscles ached. I wanted to let the whole tidal wave of truth loose, to fountain it into the policeman's face. I tried to let it all out, and the sound I made was nothing more than a whisper of wind. The officer frowned, wrote nonverbal on his pad, and stood up. He talked with the counselors, asked about the program's philosophy. They showed him brochures. They explained the bracelets as a biofeedback device with a safety switch. They showed him a sign-in sheet with parental names and signatures, and a therapist's certificate taped in a plastic sleeve. The officer's voice softened.
There's a therapeutic component to some programs,
He said, and I heard the conclusion in it before it was formed. He checked the registration. He smiled and made a note about no evidence of abuse. He left, and with him, so did my last chance. I have no idea what's going to happen now, but I know one thing for sure. If another opportunity does come my way, I will be prepared. Someone needs to know what's happened here, and I will be the reason why they find out. That, or I'm going to die trying.